Want everyone's mind to be with us as we go forward. This is not a presentation in maybe the normal way. If you were actually in a masterclass, or masterclass is done for all sorts of things, right? You've seen masterclass that's online, but there are lots of masterclasses that are done for a number of things. Opera singers have master classes, actors have master classes. And what happens is people are asked to bring to the master class some snippet that shows the best that they can do. And then someone who's considered a very big expert then takes that snippet and says, these are the things that I would alter just in small ways in order to refine your approach. So most master classes are actually an interactive kind of an activity. This master class, because there are so many of us, is something which is a bit more me broadcasting to you, and hopefully we can get to that other element of interactivity through the questions. So please send your questions through. I know before we even started, there were already 6 or 7 questions. So please send your questions through so we can actually tailor this. But what it is that we're trying to do again is we're trying to work on the small pieces, on the margins, the things that with a little bit of a crank, a little bit of a tweak is going to make a huge difference in the results that this group is able to achieve on an individual as well as a collective basis. So let's just be clear. I'm revealing everything right now. I believe that, again, this group is the answer. So here is, if you are in the UK today, this is your situation. And when I say your situation, I also mean my situation. Back in 2014, I moved to the UK, which before I thought was going to be a short period of time. Here I am 9 years later, still living in the UK and now a British citizen. And things that I didn't realize when I first came to the UK, because I usually came as a tourist, have really struck me and really have stuck with me. And this is where I think some of the challenges are that we need to be addressing, and how we as the GTA and people who are interested in and have similar ethos and values as the GTA, how we can work together on things like the wealth gap. Those of you who don't know this, back in 2018, it was first reported that 1 in 2 Black children in the UK lived below the poverty line. So that means that 1 in 2 Black households here in the UK, and I'm talking Black, I mean what I think we sometimes call Afro-Caribbean, are living below the poverty line. So if you walk down the street and you see 2 children walking together, one is living in poverty. If you think about sort of who your neighbor is and you live next to a Black neighbor, one of you is living in poverty. That is an astronomical and a very sobering statistic. And that was 2018 when that statistic came out. And since then, what has happened? We've had COVID, we've had the cost of living crisis, we have rampant inflation. We have got so many things that have pushed even more people below the poverty line. So now the majority of Black people in the UK, the majority of us live in poverty. 1 in 5 of our white colleagues live in poverty. When you think about then some of the causes of poverty, and the ability to borrow money, for instance, the ability to use assets and leverage those in the time of an emergency, the challenge that exists for Black Britain is that only 1 in 5 of us own our own homes. And if you think about wealth, wealth is everything that you have in terms of possessions minus all the liabilities that you have. The delta between those is wealth. Wealth is the thing which allows you to borrow in many situations, that and income. Wealth is the thing which allows you to invest. So if you wanted to start a business, it's the thing which allows you to invest. And in the UK, 20% of Black Britons have what is the most important asset for most people in the world. Their biggest asset is the equity in their home. And only 20% of Black Britons have a home that they actually own. 68% of their white peers own their own home, and 74% of their Indian British peers own their own home. So the numbers differ not just a little bit, but markedly in terms of poverty and in terms of home ownership. So in terms of absolute poverty and in terms of wealth accumulation. That if we look at wealth accumulation in the UK, and that's the next column here, even though the education and employment gaps have been closing over a period of years, Black households in the UK only have 1/8 as much net wealth as their white counterparts. Whereas a Black household, each adult individual in the household is worth about £24,000, which might sound like a lot. The average white adult has £197,000. of net worth. And a lot of that is held in the house that they actually own and that they live in. Interestingly, Black Britons are tending to live in concentration, and they're tending to live in concentrations in urban centers. And those urban centers are a great place to be for the sake of connectivity and opportunity for exposure and the like, but it also is a place where other things happen, such as higher pollution rates, higher mortality rates, et cetera, et cetera. So, in any case, and it also is a place where we're able to accumulate, even though the high value of real estate, we're not owning that real estate because we're renting. And that is helping to undermine our net wealth. An interesting piece for you all, because a lot of the people who are on this call are interested in businesses. I think that this next statistic is dramatic, and it's pulled from the United States, but also has sort of some relevance here to the UK. If you own your own business as a Black business owner, your net worth is 12 times the net worth wealth of anyone who is any Black person who is working for someone else. Think about it. If you, at the time that you measure your wealth and how many assets you have versus how much debt you have, and sort of what is the delta between those two, that Black business owners are much wealthier than people who work for other people. This is no matter whether you work for KPMG, whether or not you work for WPP, whether or not you work for Continental. No matter where you work, a person who owns their own business in the UK as well as in the US is likely to have 12 times the income of a person who is working for somebody else. I want to point out, and I want you to sort of take a moment. Let's just take a moment with those sort of facts. And the real question for me is, how do these facts make you feel? How do these facts make you feel? I'm not giving you the facts to dispirit you. I'm giving you the facts so that we have a context, so that we can understand what it is that I'm talking about. And that context being that with this set of facts, we've got a number of issues that we've got to deal with in order to be able to get what I think is the most important thing, and that is equality, racial and gender equality here in the UK. Let's go on and look at some more facts. Again, not for the sake of depressing, but for being very realistic about what it is that we're talking about. And I want to talk here about businesses and starting businesses. And I really want to focus on 5 points from this particular slide. This is all about access to capital. Let me give you the headline. The headline is that Black people, particularly Black women, have a very hard time accessing capital to start their businesses in the UK, in the US, and even around the world. Not to say that we become depressed about that, but that we solve about that. We solve for that particular reality. So, in the UK, that in the third column up there, you can see Black women are the fastest growing demographic of all entrepreneurs in the UK and the US. That is a very encouraging sign that Black women are coming up with businesses and starting business at a rate that outpaces everyone else. And we're talking about Afro-Caribbean women in this particular situation. That those are women who are starting businesses that are technology companies, that are health education and well-being companies, that are media and entertainment companies. Go on, go on, go on. They're starting businesses that are taking the world into space. They're dealing with the circular economy. They're dealing with food security. All those sort of categories are being populated by Black women. The thing to understand about this, and is another sobering reality, is that the way that most of these businesses get started from the very beginning by Black women creates a challenge. The top 3 sources of funding, if you ever hear me talk, you'll know I talk about this all the time. There are 3 sources of funding for businesses, and they are personal savings, you also get money to start a business through bank loans. And then finally, you get the ability to start a business through credit cards. There's a 4th way through revenues coming from people, from services or products that are sold, so from customers. So there's also that particular way of actually starting businesses. But when we think about starting up funding, that most of the time, the vast majority of people use those 3. And Black women, Black men also, but Black women in particular, generally have to rely upon credit cards to start their businesses. And if I ask you the question, why is that a problem? I think you'd immediately come up with, because it's a very expensive way to borrow money in order to start a business. If you go to the bank, for instance, and the bank is giving you a 5% or 10, even a 10% loan at this point with inflation, it is much less than what you'd be paying in terms of interest on a credit card. But if you look at that first column, in the UK, the reason that people don't use the banks in order to get money to start their businesses is because, in fact, this is the challenge, that the banking system is really not open to them. You are four times less likely than your white peers, no matter what is the state of your business. You are four times less likely than your white peers to be given a bank loan. We've already talked about, so that's one thing. So bank loans are kind of out of the picture for most Black women who are starting businesses. Beyond that, we've already talked about about the poverty rate in the UK and home ownership. So personal savings are actually lower, and also net wealth. Personal savings, net wealth is much lower for Black people. Therefore, we have a situation where not only can we not rely upon our own, we can't rely upon our own incomes to put away money in order to be able to then fund if we want to start a business. Our neighbors and friends, our friends and family, which is often what's used to start a business, they are also in the same boat. They don't have the capital to be able to invest in third-party businesses. So we can't rely upon that. We can't get a bank loan, so what do we have to do? We have to use credit cards. And then often we find ourselves, even with credit cards, and even if we do get started, still constrained from a working capital perspective on a monthly basis. And then it is this deadly cycle, which causes these companies to be less profitable. In fact, I go to the next slide and look at that middle column that says the median turnover for a Black UK business is £25,000 a year, meaning that half of companies make more, half of companies make less. So if you're a Black business in the UK, at least half of us are actually making less than £25,000 a year in turnover. And that means if we take away all of the money that has to be used for rent, any sort of employee cost, any sort of cost of expenses, supplies, and other sorts of things, we're then making less money than the living wage of an employee, a relatively low-paid employee in London. And that is the situation. And it starts very early with how we fund our businesses, and they become less profitable. So the question is, do we marinate on this for a little while longer, these various dynamics? Do we talk a little bit more about sort of what the world actually looks like, or do we go to solutions? I would say I want to go to solutions. And I want to ask the question to you all. If you were to solve the problem of Black economic disparity here in the UK, and you wanted to say that at the end of the day, how do we make sure that Black Britons are doing as well as their white counterparts? What do you think is the best and most important answer? That's my question. What do you think is the best, and what do you think is the most important answer? So, from my perspective, we need to ask the question, are we really thinking in terms of old models for change? And the reason that I say that, you all, is because I think very frequently when the knee-jerk reaction of people is, you know what we need to do is we need to get Black people in Britain better jobs, because those better jobs are going to really be the savior. And I want to take you to the slide that you're looking at now, and I want to take you to the first three of those bottom four highlighted areas. There have been studies that have recently been done about, and we've been talking here in the UK forever about, build back better, leveling up, and that type of thing. Many of us come from families where education is sort of the golden rule, and then after education is to get yourself a good job. Well, I believe that there is a real myth around the good job. Let me say it one more time. I think there is a real myth around the good job of working for someone else. We've already talked about, if you work for someone else, you're going to be less rich than people who own their own businesses. But beyond that, if you look at studies that are done about Black women who are working in organizations. This is whether you're working in government organizations, whether you're working in private industry. This is a very common, and I ask you to ask yourself, is this true for you? That in 66% of UK Black professionals report that they experience racial prejudice at work. That is more than 3/4 of all Black professionals in the UK. Places that we have really tried to strive to be in. We want to be in those halls of power. We want to be working at number 10. We want to be in the House of Commons. We want to be working on big, important issues. We want to be at PricewaterhouseCoopers. We want to be at the Bank of England. We wish to be at Simon and Schuster. We wish to be at the BBC. And what we have found in doing surveys is that 3/4 of us say we face prejudice there. And so, what does that mean? Go to the next column. Look at this. If in it, 53% of Black UK female professionals, and I'm sure everyone on this phone call is actually one of those people. You're a Black female. I think most of us are Black, and most of us are, and most of the people on this phone call are female. 53% of you are saying that you are going to stay at your job for less than 2 years. 53%, if you're a Black man and you add those and you then average in those numbers, 46% of all Black people say that they are going to stay in their current employer for less than 2 years. This is telling me that people don't feel as though there's a path forward. People feel as though the barriers to participation are such that it doesn't make good sense to stay, and that there is a greener pasture someplace else. Go to the next column. 2/5 of UK Black professionals say their companies, the reason that, and one of the reasons why they're leaving, so go back to column 2, one of the reasons we're leaving is because two-fifths of us report, almost half of us say that their companies, their processes for promotion, their processes in general, their processes for performance evaluation, hiring as well and pay are not fair at all, or they're only slightly fair. So again, this idea, and I came from a family where my parents were like, Eric, you go to a good school. And so they pay for me to go to a good school. And then they say, go out and get a job. And I go out and get a job. And this is what I face. I face, in the first instance, what I find to be explicit racial prejudice, not just microaggressions, but racial prejudice. I don't end up staying for very long in these organizations because they are not places that I can actually excel and thrive. And the reason that I find that out is because as I go through the processes of hiring and pay increases, as I go through the performance evaluation process, as I look for promotion, I find that I'm being treated unfairly. So, if indeed we have a situation where it is hard to start a business as a Black person because capital is hard to come by, and if it's hard to stay in the corporate world or the public sector because all the things which drive us away and we're unlikely to stay there forever, what's the answer? Is there any sort of promised land? And what would the promised land bring? And this is what I want to make sure that we're talking about today, because my opinion is, and what I talk about in the book, We Don't Need Permission, is that we have got to give up, or not give up, but supplement some of the tactics that we have been using over the years in order to create financial inclusion, societal integration, and ultimately equity and Black empowerment. And the only way that we are going to be able to do that, because we've already tried, now listen to this very closely, the only way we're going to be able to do that is a different way than we've currently been using. If we rely upon the government has been governing forever, not just this government, but previous governments, not just the Tory government, but Labour governments also. And we find that 1 in 2 Black children, the evidence speaks for itself, 1 in 2 Black children still live in poverty. That is an indisputable fact. Government has not helped to rectify that. Some people would say austerity measures and others have actually caused that to be worsened, and that the kind of a cost of living crisis is one of the results of all of that going on. So we don't rely upon government. Private industry, well, can we worry about the capital markets and depend upon the capital markets as they currently exist? Think about it. We're sitting in the situation over the last 12 or 13 years. before 2022, we had the biggest run up in terms of investing in companies, creating innovation, disrupting the world in ways that have never been seen, creating the biggest amounts of wealth that we've seen consolidated in a few hands that have ever been created. And yet, 1 in 2 Black children still live in poverty in the UK. We have what, 4 Black people that are on the 1,000 richest people in the UK. 4 is not 4%. 4 is 0.04%, 0.4%. It goes on and on. The evidence indicates that the methods that are being used now don't necessarily work. George Floyd gets killed in the United States, and we march in in solidarity with Black Lives Matter here in the UK, in various cities around the country. We topple statues, we do all sorts of things, and we still find that we have not been saved, and that Chris Kaba can still be killed by police here in the UK in another sort of an act that feels very murderous. So that doesn't seem to work necessarily marching. So we vote, and we vote for the public servants who don't necessarily seem to serve our interests, but we still need to vote. And we then join these organizations that we then quickly decide are not sort of the panacea and promised land that we'd hope for them to be. So what is? Again, in the book, We Don't Need Permission, this is what I talk about. Because my belief is the thing which has undermined all of the efforts that we have so put forward through generations of Black people. And we have been in the UK. In the book, I talk about some of the history of Black participation as business people in the UK. We've been participating as business people and known business people since the 1700s. It has been, and in numbers for, a good many centuries. So what is it that we need to do? What we need to do is what we haven't been able to do, and that is to fund our own interests. Meaning that if indeed we believe that the most important thing is solving this problem of 1 in 2 Black children living below the poverty line, what we don't have is we don't have the money to make that happen. If what we believe is that we need to be seeing different programming that's being presented on the BBC so that we see images that are a bit more positive, whether they be for very young children in terms of animated series, or whether it be for older adults in terms of historical dramas, we don't see those things. We decide we're going to go to the BBC or ITV or Channel 4 or you name the place. And what will we find? We'll find that we have to go hat in hand to ask someone, can you believe that this vision is important in educating young Black children about whatever it is, whether it be from the Windrush generation straight through to Chevalier St. George? We want to make sure that those stories are told. How do we make sure that those stories get told? Well, often we have to go to someone who's a gatekeeper and negotiate with them. And then that negotiation, things get watered down. And by the time something happens years later, it's not exactly what our vision was in the first place. The common problem and the common thread in all of that is we do not control the resources needed in order to be able to make the decisions we wish to make as a people, or even as individuals. And the manner to get around that is something very different than what we have now. The manner to get around that is for us to create businesses. We have businesses. As this slide told you, lots of Black women are building businesses at a rate we've never seen before in history. Some of that is out of necessity because we've lost our other jobs. We have parenting responsibilities or childcare responsibilities that require us to have more flexibility in our schedule, and owning our own business allows that. We have a set of skills that is better sort of conveyed through having our own business. There are a number of reasons why people go into having their own business. But what we don't have is we've never had a very large scale business. We've never had a Fortune 100, FTSE 100 company or FTSE 200 company or a FTSE 300 company that was started by a Black person. We've never had a Fortune 500 company in the United States that was started by a Black person. All of that, those are the sorts of organizations that generate a great deal of capital, which can be used for various things, sort of underwriting political campaigns, commissioning certain sorts of content creation, buying certain sorts of media platforms, spending time starting businesses and incubating other businesses. That is what happens and what is possible when you have a large scale business. For instance, let me give you a for instance. Have any of you heard of the name Elon Musk? And I'm sure you all giggle about that and laugh. I do too. But Elon Musk is a person who you read about every day, correct? Elon Musk has never been elected to a public office. Elon Musk has never won an Olympic gold medal. Elon Musk has never had a number one hit song anywhere in the world. Elon Musk is a private citizen who has started some companies. And through starting companies, not small companies, but very large scale companies, has been able to affect a number of things. If you imagine Elon Musk today, then many of us might focus on him with respect to Twitter, because he was able, through the accumulation of assets someplace else, to buy a major media platform. We have a thing called Black Twitter. Elon Musk owns Black Twitter and all of Twitter as a private citizen. So he owns a media channel that we're using to communicate amongst ourselves, which is fine. But he's the one who was able to buy that because he was able to accumulate wealth. Elon Musk is involved in conversations about my company plans to build a new plant in your country or in your community, and we want to talk about living standards in that community. We want to talk about tax breaks in that community. We want to talk about the educational system so we can get engineers who are correctly trained into this facility as the years progress. That's the kind of conversation he gets to be in. And he also gets to talk about, and I want to figure out how we get very precious resources that will never be reproduced again. How do we get those so we can create these batteries? And so he talks about conservation and the circular economy. Keep on going. Elon Musk gets to participate in conversations about, after we destroy this world, if we do destroy this world, how do we go to the next one with respect to his SpaceX? So he gets to then talk to governments. He gets to talk to municipalities about sort of what the world will be in the future and where that world will actually be in the future someplace else. And imagine that sort of power as it exists by a private citizen who, through the accumulation of capital, has built hard and soft power. He actually, if you think about it, with the Ukraine war, he was helping to provide the infrastructure for free so the Ukrainians could talk amongst themselves as the infrastructure was being destroyed by the Russians, and they could still use satellite technology in order to be able to talk. And at some point he said, "I'm going to turn off that satellite technology, and we can't have it for free. Someone's going to have to pay for this." And so he owns the ability for the war to actually exist. There has never been a Black woman. There has never been a Black man who has been able to wield that sort of power. And it is not unheard of that can be done. And most importantly for me, that can be done in a single generation. When you were born, Elon Musk did not exist in the way he does now. But he has been able to, within a single generation, between 12 and 20 years, to actually elevate his status tremendously. And that's what we'd like to be able to happen with Black women. There's a Black woman in Birmingham. There's a Black woman in Bristol. There's a Black woman in Edinburgh. There's a Black woman in South Bend. There's a Black woman in Cornwall, who is going to be, in my opinion, because all the potential is there, one of the competitors in terms of scale, scope, and influence as names like Jeff Bezos, names like Mark Zuckerberg, names like Meg Whitman, names like Sheryl Sandberg. There are going to be people who maybe even are listening to this message today, who will actually be able to be the individuals who will compete directly with and make sure that they are in that competition also changing the center of gravity. And that's what we have done since I've started my career at ImpactX, investing in companies, making sure we get to that point. And this is what the book We Don't Need Permission talks about. And so what is the role that I think that you as a GTA attendee today can actually play? And I've laid it out in these 10 steps. And I wanted to say all the things that I said in advance of these 10 steps, because I think these 10 steps are self-explanatory. They're in the book, so you can read about them more deeply if you'd like. But I do want to emphasize a few things. That the first thing is capital. When you think about the first step, you need to embrace the unexpected. And that is a very hard lesson. For those of you, maybe some of you are in finance, the unexpected is not a good thing, right? Maybe you come from families where, we plan everything. A vacation is really a set of spreadsheets, and we know exactly what we're going to do every minute so we can really squeeze out the last bit of juice from this lemon. In my opinion, some of this, it's serendipity that creates some of the most interesting opportunities. And when combined with something which is a plan, when something happens that is unexpected, what you do with it in order to maximize the opportunity with the new and changed fact pattern is extremely important. Think about COVID. Think about inflation. People who have a plan, organizations that had a plan that this is how we're going to function and the world is going to remain the same, supply chain is going to stay just where it is. Something unexpected happens, and what do? This is when your true grit is noted. This is when your true creativity is noted. You need to embrace that not as, oh no, the sky is falling, that's Chicken Little reference, but instead, aha, now there's a new opportunity. The old business model might be under pressure. The old ways of working might no longer make sense. I don't know how long that's going to be the case, but at least for a while, what do I need to do? And organizations that embrace think about this as opportunity and move forward the same way as you. I don't know the number of times I've been fired from jobs. And of course, there's depression, there's unhappiness, there is trying to explain it to the family and making people understand that we still will probably eat, and we'll keep the heat on, that we I've had to in those situations say that this is good. And most of the time, in fact, I think all of the time, it's actually been very good because it has helped me to get out of a situation where I was going to be a consultant for the strategy consultant for the rest of my life. I would never have moved to the UK, never have been on the television show The Moneymaker, never have had the opportunities to do things such as write this book had I actually stayed in the same space doing the same things that were safe. So embracing the unexpected is very important. Another thing which I think is important is the second step to remember that you should be engaging in consistent and continuing acts of disruption. That the way in which we have gotten organizations like Radio One, started by a Black woman in the in the US named Kathy Hughes, which is a publicly traded company in the United States, or the way that we've gotten Pat McGrath Labs, is because of continuous and consistent acts of disruption. Pat McGrath, you might not think of this as disruption, but Pat McGrath is one of the first who spent time actually applying various non-makeup oriented objects onto high fashion models, setting a new standard for what is beauty in terms of tints and colors. She could have followed L'Oreal. She could have followed Estee Lauder. She could have followed Shiseido. But instead, she did something another way, found a niche, and then utilized that niche to great advantage, and then created a multi-billion-dollar empire. A UK Birmingham young woman who didn't go to university. That's what she's been able to do. But hers is consistent and continuous acts of disruption. So many people that I notice lose heart because at some point it becomes hard. The challenge that you have is that in terms of if things become hard, because they're never easy, no one rolls out of bed and becomes a billionaire, is that it shows the kind of tenacity you have. And the most important characteristic for a successful big business owner is tenacity, the ability to embrace the unexpected, roll the punches, and be continuously disruptive. I don't ever want to get into a pattern of comfort. I want to constantly be looking for things that make sense in a new, evolving, and changing world 5 years from now, 10 years from now, not at this minute. Like, what do my customers want now? That's a question that's becomes obsolete the minute after you ask it. What do my customers want in 10 years? That's a question. And that requires continuous and consistent disruption, observation, analytics, and the like, which takes me to my point about number 4, which is facts work much better than myths. The number of people that I hear who say to me that what I'd like to do in terms of starting a business, and I think this can create a business, but it doesn't create a large scale business. And remember, my answer to how do we get Black Britain to not have 1 in 2 Black children living in poverty is by making sure that what we actually do is that we actually build big businesses. One of the myths is that what I want is what the world wants. So I have a child who is dyslexic. I have a child who has eczema. I have a child who can't take a certain type of nutrient. To the extent that we then develop a market, we develop products and solutions and services around those, that's a good thing to do. And that goes to sort of point number 6, which is leverage what you know. But the most important thing is not just my own singular experience. It is before I spend a lot of money and try and then package these goods and then take these goods out to market and then see whether or not people will buy them, is you use data to mitigate the risk, which are your establishment risk, your operating risk, and then also your exit risk. So take the time to actually survey. It can be a very simple survey at point of sale when you're talking to people who aren't your friends and family, asking them very questions and listening to the hard truths about what they tell you about your price point, about your ingredients, about the smells, about the texture, about why they would or wouldn't, how they would actually buy, and then go with that. Why they want to buy from a retail store as opposed to buying online from you, even though your margins are different. Those are the sorts of things that are much more useful. It is much better to function from the space of real data, and then you can make real decisions as opposed to myths and sort of test hypotheses. That's a different method and one that I don't suggest. The other two things that I would point out in here before I want to go on to questions is there, point number 3 and point number 8. Point number 3 is that very frequently what we find when I'm talking to people about let's build businesses that change the world and become behemoths, what I often am hearing are things which indicate to me that those are individuals who are ready to build lifestyle businesses. I want to be able to, pay my bills. Gotcha. I want to be able to send my kids and make my kids' life comfortable. Gotcha. I want to be able to change my community. Gotcha. Is that it? Do we want to be able to change the world? Do we want to actually be able to impact in ways that transcend geography, that transcend gender, age, race? If that's what we're looking to do, what are those sort of ideas? Jeff Bezos named his company Amazon. He didn't name it Thames. And the reason he named it Amazon is because Amazon is that much bigger than any other river in the world. And he decided, I'm taking the biggest river, the most audacious sort of water source, and I'm going to say that's what I want to be from the very beginning. So thinking not what can I do, what I have money to do, but what would be the thing which is transformative. And if you're listening to me and you say, well, Eric, that's easy for him to do, I'd say it's easy for all of us to do. And I say, no, I wouldn't say it's easy. I would say it's not as hard as we think. Because, quite frankly, what a person like Jeff Bezos does is then put forward a vision and a plan that actually makes that a logical solution that it needs to be the Amazon. Some of us, what we do is we hold back and we hold back and we say, well, I want to do something which is within my capabilities. I want to do something which I know that I can make happen. Well, then, and I can do it on my own because I really want to work by myself and with myself and for myself. And you're like, well, that's fine. But then you're always going to create a small, maybe something which works on the regional basis, maybe something which works on the national basis if you're quite lucky. But I think we have to think bigger than that and move to a larger space. And the final thing that I would say is that number 8, invest in women to create alpha. I would quote from the book, actually. Chapter 8 starts with, each one of the chapters in the book starts with a quote. And chapter 8 starts with one of the most profound quotes to me of this particular book, because it was written by a woman it was said by a woman who was the first Black woman to represent her constituency in Congress in the United States. So she was elected in late 60s, early 70s. Her name was Shirley Chisholm. So Shirley Chisholm was the first one. She's a maverick. She's a unicorn. She'd never been seen before. And she said, if they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair. Let's be clear. I've given you all these facts. I've given you all these figures about how the world actually exists in the UK and around the world today. And quite frankly, we understand that is saying that people have not planned for us, and particularly Black women, to be there. That's their problem. We're going to bring a folding chair and sit down anyway to be part of the conversation and to make the world in the way that we'd like to see it made. And quite frankly, that is why, as chapter 8 says, Black women are an excellent investment. If we're talking about grit, if we're talking about tenacity, if we're talking about the ability to create their way out of situations and into other situations, out of one reality and into another, Black women are able to do that. So that is why I don't just do number 10, which is bet on Black women, because they create alpha. So GTA, it has been a pleasure speaking to you about this particular subject. The book is called We Don't Need Permission. The lessons are drawn to help you to create big, big businesses And for me, this is a manifesto about what I want to see and what I want to support and what Impact X supports. We are supporting the next generation of super large, super influential, purpose driven organizations that not only create a lot of alpha and capital, but then create a lot of change in the world. Because, quite frankly, we cannot rely upon the strategies we have relied upon to this point. It is impossible to get the world we want to if we keep on doing the same thing. So let's go out there and together, because this is a collaborative process, let's build those businesses. And I do hope that you are leveraging your relationships within GTA and the ones that GTA, blah, 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 and her organization are helping to make happen, that you're leveraging those to actually do the work and to help build the businesses, that we're not constantly looking for someone else, that we're actually starting here with the people we know and leveraging our own resources. And that's not just money, but our own talents, time, and experience in order to create the world that we'd like to see. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to go to questions. So I'm going to stop sharing and go to questions. First of all, I think we need to stop thinking that the corporate UK is the place where we're going to be successful. And we need to stop measuring success in terms of people and their perceived power within organizations that are white-dominated organizations, because I believe that there are places for all those things, and you should actually be in those positions. However, if you really want to make a change in those organizations, I'm not answering your question directly, but I'm going to get around to it. That what you do is use a top-down strategy. If we had a company, if Amazon says to any law firm or any bank in the UK, in order for you to work with me, you had better have a Black woman leading my engagement team, guess what would happen? That the organizations would find a way. I'd never hear this comment ever again upon there's not enough. We had to start them at the bottom and then grow them to the top. People would out there running, trying to chase people down on the street, Black women that they see on the street. We got to get you into this organization because because we're going to lose money unless we're working with Black people. Therefore, we need organizations that can actually drive that top down. And that's exactly what I'm saying here. So take an organization like Amazon, which employs probably hundreds and thousands of law firms every day, hundreds and thousands of accounting firms every day in various parts of the world. Utilize that buying power and which is a soft power and a hard power, in order to change organizations from the outside in and from the top down. I don't believe in this bottoms up. I believe bottoms up is fine. You should train people. And then my second portion of this is, and if you're going into one of those organizations, let's think about it as an opportunity to learn. Most of us, as the statistics show, are going to be leaving an organization in 2 years. We want to leave that organization with a great set of experiences, relationships, as well as skill sets that we can then actually monetize elsewhere or for our own businesses. So in my opinion, that the way to do this is not only by sort of going and learning on someone else's dime, but when you're learning on someone else's dime, make sure you're actually learning something, getting exposure to something, building networks with people who are going to be useful going forward, having created value for them, and then move on to other sorts of things where you might again accumulate more information. But make sure you spend time then thinking to yourself, how can, in this situation, I be helpful? How do I use the money that I'm making at my high paid job to make sure that I'm then supporting Black services and others, so that I have a circular economy about Black pounds and pence? All those sorts of things are deliberate actions to be taken, all talked about in the book, all things which are within your control to do. There's nothing about this which is rocket science and something which is unknown.
Okay, sorry guys, I don't think you could hear the question previously because I wasn't on stage. So the question that Eric just answered is in the chat. And the next question was asked by Nicole, which is home ownership still a realistic or worthwhile indicator of wealth given the barriers of our current climate? Often the solution to the high deposit income requirements of buying in London is to buy in small towns where the standard of living is more challenging, i.e., limited access to community, higher rates of racism, etc.
So look, most people, let's take the fact, most people who are in the world, in the UK, where home ownership is very high, most people their wealth, how much wealth they have, that number that I said, which is the differential between black and white, which is about what's that? Almost 40 percentage points. That I think it's more than 40%. No, it's more than 40 percentage points. 48 percentage points. That the difference in terms of net worth, which is 197 to 24,000, 197,000, 24,000, is based on home ownership. Home ownership to me is no panacea. Home ownership is simply homes are simply an asset class. There are other asset classes. However, if you are not in a position where you're actually taking on some of those other asset classes, and the world is changing, and home ownership is not necessarily the be all end all. However, if indeed you don't then say to yourself, if I'm not owning a home, what am I doing in terms of asset creation? So am I working in a company that gives me shares of stock? Shares of stock are an asset, and they can accrue in value just as quickly, if not more quickly. We, as ImpactX, bought into a company which was started by twins here in the UK, Black twins, Oliver and Alexander Kent Braham. We bought in when it was 30 million pre-money valuation. We put in a small amount of money. 18 months later, it's worth 1.2 billion. That kind of an increase in our assets is something which then we can borrow against. We can do all sorts of things. The same thing you can do with a house. So it's not as though that's the only thing, but you've got to do something. And if you cannot do it in the city because of the cost, then maybe someplace else is perfectly fine. However, you need to do something. Decide what it is that you're going to do and do it. And I would say that one of the things you should do is think about investing when you have the capital, the extra capital. Think about investing in another Black woman who has a business that you think is a good business, and they have a business plan. Not just that they have a good idea, not that they're just your friend, but you interrogate their business plan, put some money there and see how it can help to stimulate them and then also grow your assets.
Okay, great answer. So the next question was asked by Donna, which is how the Black diaspora/descent can organize to redirect our money toward Black businesses and empower ourselves.
So ImpactX was built out of this. If you all have heard of a famous Brit named Lenny Henry. Lenny Henry, a Black Brit of Jamaican descent who grew up in Dudley, decided that what he was going to do was he was going to stop complaining about the state of Black Britain. We know the statistics, who needs to hear them more? Who needs to sort of bemoan the fact that they exist? What he decided to do was go to somebody that he just heard about, a guy named Tom Alube, another Black Brit, who had just been named #1 in the Power List, the list of powerful Black people in the UK. And Tom Alube was #1. We're somewhat ranked in that list. And Lenny introduced himself and said, I want us to solve the problem of how do you make sure that Black Britain is improved and empowered. Tom Alube put together a group of about 40 Black leaders. From that, they had not a social session where they had a gala and a dinner and they danced. Instead, they had a working session at someone's house, and they came up with solutions. And one of the solutions was we need to put more money into the hands of Black people, and we need to put our own money in first. And that's what happened. So we pooled our resources. They asked me, because of my startup experience, to be in charge. And then we built out ImpactX, which has then been investing in 25 companies up till now, and talk to thousands of others about how we can help to become better businesses. Do the same thing. You don't need me, and you don't need people like Adrian Lester. You don't need people like Ursula Burns, the first Black woman to run a Fortune 500 company, or Rick Lewis, who has the biggest Black business here in the UK, or Rob Pierre, who has the biggest PR agency of his sort in Europe. You don't need those people. You could use yourselves to actually do that. Pool your resources, and it doesn't have to just be money. It could be the expertise and experience you have in order to choose a single topic, but a focused topic, and focus and get it done as a group and a collective. That's how we do it. We come up with good plans, and then we enlist and recruit people to help us to execute those plans. That's what we do.
Okay, great. So the next question, Nicole also asked another question earlier, which was advice on staying the course and remaining motivated during the inevitable rough patches.
Stop being a lone wolf and start working as a pack. You can bring down bigger games. People spend so much time on their own, sort of by themselves. I want to do this, I'd like to do that, and I want to be the CEO. And that's a very hard sort of a idea to get behind, and a very hard sort of a dynamic for most of us as individuals. So what I would say is build a team. Those teams are the people who help us through the rough patches, just like your family. You're building a different sort of a family. And for me, I brought to my team 5 people who were very different from me, came from very different backgrounds, but helped to make the operational side and the investing side of Impact X that much more pleasurable. So I find that that is the way to do things. But you have to be able to recruit teams, and recruiting teams means you have to have a vision, you have to have a plan that people are interested in, and you have to have a willingness to listen and sort of co-lead. And you also need to have a very good set of a very good judgment about people and their character, which is better done instead of your just judgment by proof points, and i.e. track record. So then you check out people and all sorts of things, and you end up with a good team.
Okay, great. Next question is from Rashida,
Mm-hmm.
who says, given the stats, are we Black entrepreneurs being less likely to be approved for bank loans despite the same turnover? Do you believe banks should be required to ring fence a pot of funding for Black business owners specifically?
Yes, but I mean, I don't have time for the government to make that a policy and then for the government to implement that policy and enforce it, with people who are racist or sexist in their positions anyway. That's a great thing to do, you all. Do we have time for that? Do we have time to let another generation of young Black children live in poverty? No, we do not. So if the government's not going to do it, I have to think about something else. I have to go back to the time when people came over and existed in the partner scheme, right? There, 4 women or 4 men would come together. They would live in, not the best conditions, but what they were doing is putting aside their capital in order to buy houses or in order to invest in companies. And that is each one would have the opportunity to get the down payment or to get sort of the cornerstone investing for their firm. And that's what they would then do. And each one of those would then help to make sure, and all 4 would help to more quickly get to their solution than a person could do on their own. In my opinion, we have to go back to those sorts of opportunities. And that is why we have to build big businesses that actually have sufficient resources and excess resource to be able to then allocate to these other things, whether they be profit or not for profit. That is, again, you will hear me say the same thing time and time again, that is what we should do. And I cannot rely upon the government, or I cannot rely upon the banking system, which has behaved the way that it has for hundreds of years, to suddenly change, and therefore for that to change. In the United States, we've seen that has been the case since the 1960s, and it's made a tremendous difference. It's 2023. That is now 60 years later. And so the question is, are we going to wait 60 years for that to make a huge difference here in the UK? And we don't have time. We don't need permission. It's about immediate action. It is not about wishing for a future that doesn't exist today, and one where we can be in charge of what we do right now.
I've got one single last question, then I'm going to announce the winners of the giveaway for the book. So this is to you, Eric. What is the single most important action that you personally have taken to positively impact your early career, your career-life balance, and your current career?
Okay. So the first part, the most important thing that I did was I took a lot of risks early in my career. That I gave up money and status early in the career when it was hard to do, because I didn't have money and I didn't have I was coming to the situation as I was, and so that was hard to do. But by doing that and not taking the road less traveled, I was able to then gain a set of experiences that proved invaluable. That was the most important thing that I did. Not listen to the common orthodoxy. You should go do this. This is coming out of law school. I went to a good law school. I went to Harvard Law School. I didn't practice law. I never practiced law. I didn't even pass the bar. And to say that I don't have to follow that pathway, that was the most important thing. In my personal life, that's in my early career. In my personal life, it's choosing the right partner. Quite frankly, you don't get to do the things that I do unless you have a great support team behind you and a great advanced team. And having the right partner at home makes all the difference. Had I not, a person who needs to stay, close to mother, or a person who needs to, for other reasons, is scared to travel or scared to pick up roots and go someplace else, or doesn't have that adventuresome nature, those things are impossible, or has no particular interest in business, or those sorts of things are very important. Now, the other things you can't control illness, mental and physical illness, and those types of things. Okay, but if you have some choices about who is going to be a great partner, choose one that's going to actually be a real partner. It's not just a plus one. And then the last piece in my later career was actually asking people to not what they could do for me. So I didn't go out asking for people to be my mentor. I didn't ask for people to have a little lunch with me so we could talk about something which is important to me, or so I could knock some ideas around with them. Instead, I went to them saying, this is what I can do for you. And I'd love maybe one day if you do something for or with me, but this is what the value I can bring to you. And the value exchange starts with me giving as opposed to you giving. That is what I have found to be the most important piece. So stop looking for sponsors, stop looking for mentors. They will present themselves when you add value. That's what I've discovered.
Okay, thank you, Eric. That was a great answer. So we have our winners for the giveaway of Eric's book, We Don't Need Permission, so which is Adiola, Nicole, Rashida, Donna, Bree, Laura, Ivy, Monica, Leonie, and Jennifer. So Flavor put the email in the chat. If you email me, you'll be able to get your free book of your 10-step guide to transformative entrepreneurship. So thank you so much, Eric, for this session. Really, really insightful, great answers and great questions, everyone. So thank you for that questions as well.
Thank you all. It's been fantastic. Thank you, Alexis. Sensational facilitating, and thank you for letting me spend some time with your team.